In a powerful show of support for nature, nearly every government in the world united behind the CBD's sweeping biodiversity plan for life on Earth. They committed to halting the extinction of threatened animal, plant, and fungi species. And in an historic first, they also committed to helping those species recover, so that the life we share our planet with can not only survive, but thrive. Making these goals a reality will take all of us working together. Reverse the Red is supporting governments, conservation experts, and communities around the world as they join forces to activate tried and tested tools and tie global efforts to local expertise. All in a coordinated effort to assess, plan, and act for wildlife. Together, we can save species from extinction. Together, we can secure our planet's future. Together, we can reverse the red.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, hello, welcome dear friends in conservation to Reverse the Red Day and to this Reverse the Red Day forum. My name is David Field. I am co-chair of Reverse the Red. I'm also the vice president of WAZA, the World Association of Zoos and Aquarium, and I'm coming to you from sunny Edinburgh in Scotland. Welcome to everybody across the globe that are joining us, and I'm seeing some wonderful messages already coming through in the chat from people far and wide. Welcome to you all. Reverse the Red Day, as you've just seen in that amazing video, is a coalition which is committed to inspiring and accelerating strategic recovery-focused action, focused on delivering on that GBF global targets, Goal A and Target 4. It really is exciting to see what Reverse the Red has already achieved and how much it's inspired and how much it's grown since that amazing World Species Congress that we had just over a year ago. So today we're going to hear from some amazing people about the additional work, the achievements, and the hope in terms of species recovery that is being inspired. So there's lots going on. We've got 2 hours packed full of information for you. And we really want you to engage. Please send your questions in to these wonderful, wonderful participants and presenters that we have today for you. What I'm going to ask you, because I'm not very good when it comes to the technical side, please don't put your questions in the chat. There is a Q&A function on Zoom. Please put your questions into there. We will do our best to address most of them. The presenters may reply directly, or we will try and come back and send you links. But please use the Q&A because I don't want to miss your valuable engagement. I will also tell you that this session is being recorded, and there is also an auto translation available through the Zoom platform. So enough from me, because we have these incredible people that are here to talk and tell us about their remarkable, and I truly mean that, the remarkable work and achievements that they are undertaking. And I hope it will spur you on to even more action, discussions, and hope. So let us begin. One of the key initiatives of Reverse the Red is the Species Pledge. We have had more than 4,000 pledges to reverse the decline of species through very specific actions in specific countries. These pledges work not only to implement strategic action, but demonstrate to key national governments the importance of species recovery efforts and their foundational role in biodiversity recovery. So I would like to begin by introducing Ian Little, Head of Conservation for the Endangered Wildlife Trust, to talk about their organisation and their incredible species pledge. Hi Ian, welcome. Over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. I'm just making sure that I can share my screen here. Can we confirm that the screen is up and live?
Yep.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, David. As David mentioned, I'm Ian Little. I'm Head of Conservation at the Endangered Wildlife Trust, and I'm going to share with you some of the work that we're doing towards species conservation in our region. The Endangered Wildlife Trust works across Southern and East Africa, across various landscapes, and we have the mission of dedicating ourselves to conserving threatened species and ecosystems in Africa to the benefit of all. While we work on a wide diversity of species across multitudes of landscapes, we have a core focus on a subset of taxonomic groups, those being the cranes, the carnivores, the birds of prey, and a suite of threatened and endemic species that occur in this unique landscape. Those include the amphibians, reptiles, freshwater fish, butterflies, golden moles, cycads, and succulent plants. We're certainly very, very fortunate to have a massive diversity of species in our areas. We work on a big diversity of species, but for the purposes of the Reverse the Red, we pledged this list of species, which include cranes, vultures, golden moles, dwarf tortoises, endemic riverine rabbit species, and a number of amphibians and reptiles, as listed here. I will go through these in a little bit more detail. Starting off with vultures, for the Reverse the Red purposes, we are focusing on the Cape vulture and the white-backed vulture. These are endangered and critically endangered species, respectively. Vultures in the African context are they're iconic to African landscapes, but they're in real trouble. There are a number of threats that face vultures, and one of those is poisoning events. So we are embarking on extensive poison interventions, and we've got a number of very technologically focused interventions that will enhance our ability to react rapidly to poisoning events, along with protected area and safe zone creation across these vast landscapes where these species occur. Then looking at cranes, we are focusing on the grey-crowned crane, which is one of 4 African crane species. Grey-crowned cranes are iconic of wetland systems in the African context, and we are working in partnership with the International Crane Foundation to protect wetlands across East and Southern Africa for this species and for the people that rely on the resources that emanate from those wetland systems. Then looking at the reptiles and amphibians, there are a whole suite of species that we work on, but some of the really iconic ones are the Albany adder, which is it's one of the smaller adders in the world, and they occur only on one property near Addo Elephant National Park, and we're working to secure that property through formal protected area proclamation. And then a number of frog species. There are 4 depicted here that we are focusing on, and again, these are all localized endemics occurring in very small geographic areas, and we are focusing on creating new protected areas to secure those habitats and to reduce the threats that directly impact on these species. And last but not least, looking at the dryland areas on the western part of South Africa, there are a number of species that are under severe threat in this landscape. Mining and habitat transformation are major threats in these landscapes. First of all, looking at riverine rabbits, as I said, these are critically endangered, occurring in small riparian stretches in these arid landscapes. Over the last couple of decades, we have discovered 2 new populations of riverine rabbits, and we're working strategically to secure those habitats. Then golden moles, which are part of the Afrotheria group. South Africa has the majority of the golden moles in the world, and in this instance, we're focusing on two species, the Funsails and the De Wintons. De Wintons was thought to be extinct for the last 90 years or so, and we managed to rediscover the species using environmental DNA. And to using these kinds of tools, figure out where the distribution of these species are, and then implement targeted conservation actions within those landscapes to protect them. And then last but not least, the dwarf tortoises, in this instance, looking at the Karoo and speckled dwarf tortoises. While these species have large extent of occurrence, their actual occupancy is very, very small. They occur in tiny little patches across their range, and those patches are dwindling. They face a number of threats, including climate change, but one of the core threats is the expansion, the artificial expansion of corvids and corvid predation, and this pied crow depicted here is the culprit there. So we're working to reduce those threats in those core landscapes. And I thank you very much, and I wish you all the best with your respective adventures and challenges towards reversing the red.
Ian, thank you very much indeed. That's incredible. I mean, you've just chosen two species in there, riverine rabbits and golden moles, which are just absolute poster childs. They're amazing species. Very, very quick question from Karen Shelley-Jones. Do you work in Madagascar at all?
No, as an organization, we don't work in Madagascar. We've got a number of partners that do work in Madagascar.
That's super. Thank you very much. Ian, thank you very much. We'll come back to some more questions to you a little later.
Thank you.
But now, I would like to turn to our next speaker, because, you know, species recovery is complex. There's a reason why Elon Musk has chosen rocket science as compared to biodiversity conservation, because it's a lot easier than species recovery. Each species, scenario, and context requires innovation, creativity, and collaboration to achieve species recovery. We can learn from one another because each story is unique. So I am absolutely delighted now to welcome Aliona Krivosheeva, who is the Conservation Director for the Association for the Conservation of Biodiversity in Kazakhstan, to talk about their work and strategy around the most incredible antelope, that Saiga antelope, to achieve that wonderful downlisting of that wonderful animal. Aliona, over to you, please.
Thank you.
Oh, I think we are we there? There we go.
Yeah, good.
Yep, you're on screen.
Good morning. Yeah, thank you. Good morning. Good. So my name is Aliona, and I represent Altyn Dala Conservation Initiative, which is the initiative, the 5 main partners. And I'm very delighted to be here and to talk about our work. So in general, Altyn Dala means golden steppe. And where we work. So we work in Kazakhstan, which is located in the heart of Eurasia, and this is the 9th largest country in the world. Here you see the blue blobs, which is a Saiga antelope range. So we have 3 populations in Kazakhstan, and I'm going to talk more about lessons learned that during our around 20 years work in Kazakhstan to recover Saiga. So what is important for us and what is our first lessons learned is evidence matter. If, at the very beginning, when we start our work, Saiga numbers are critically low, and we started with data gathering just to understand problem, the current situation where we are, and to understand the basis, how we should work. And it was the data that led us to make many decisions that have been key for recovery and for recovery of the species in Kazakhstan. So for example, telemetry has informed this expansion of protected areas or creation new protected areas, or where to the number of rangers patrol to fight anti-poaching and however, interestingly, the process of collecting and using data is, and you always make the decision based on the best available data that you have at the, but you will never know everything, and that's okay. This is the process, but you never should give up or stop collecting data, because this is definitely inform your conservation efforts. So here you can see a very short video to illustrate. This is the saiga that were colored, and this is the movement of colored saiga. This is the border with Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, and this is how we reveal their migration, their key shell places for them. Yeah, but what is also interesting, as a partnership, we have been collecting data for around 20 years, and we have a lot of them. So of course, data were the basis for our actions and for our decisions, but we still don't have time and human resources to process this data and to do good and proper publication. So this is the first what I'm going to talk about. Lessons learned from our initiative. So this is about understanding the roles of stakeholders. So what we realized, that the possible way to restore saiga numbers in Kazakhstan, taking into account the size of the country, the range of saiga and the 3 ranges, and taking it into account the size species, and it migrates for many thousands of kilometers, and the scale of the problem itself, we realized that only working together with the government and having understanding clear roles of each partner in this process give a real result. Because the little national NGO, or not little, doesn't matter how many, whether it's 10 or 100 people, and even as an international initiative, you still so many resources that the government has, and we need to establish this partnership and identify to achieve the common results. And for saiga, the main problem and the main threat for saiga was poaching. Saiga was heavily poached by its horns. It was used in traditional Chinese medicine. To fight with this, first of all, there was a very high-level political will to establish a ban for saiga hunting in Kazakhstan, and this ban was around 30 years, because previous hunting species, and then there was a moratorium for 30 years. Also, what government did, it was huge increase in the number of state rangers for saiga patrolling and anti-poaching. So also the government, there were changes in national legislation connected with anti-poaching work, and it was real threaten the legislation. It really works, but this is only what government is able to do. And when I tell government, there is a of this. So this is the Custom and Border Service that is fighting against illegal wildlife. This is state agencies who hire the rangers and create protected areas. So this is a very different ways of working, but this is what is extremely our role as initiative was to support government, to guide them with the data that we have, with current problems. So I think this is the lesson, that we can't work without government relationships and without clear roles in all of this process. The third and also important point and important lessons is what we realized is how extremely important is to work with the people. Local people, school children, students, doesn't matter, but you should engage in this work, people. You can spend on conservation, but if people in Saiga range and in the country as a whole do not understand it is necessary, do not see the value of biodiversity, in the end, your work will kind of meaningless. Another important thing to remember and understand that people in the country is a very, very big force. For example, in our case, like for 20 or 25 years in Kazakhstan, everyone about Saiga conservation. That Saiga is a symbol and the heart of Kazakh steppe, and we should be proud and we should conserve this species. However, everyone has forgotten that Saiga were once the numbers were maintained in a stable high level, having hunting at the same time. Understanding of the government was that we should recover, we should restore the number of Saigas or use this species. And that was clear message from everyone, but to conserve and from the mass media and from the government was just to restore. And however, in the process of working to restore the number of Saiga, we forgot about the second sustainable use, the possibility of sustainable use of this species. And when the number of Saiga reached 3 or 4 million last year, the government started to think about sustainable use of Saiga. But the people in Kazakhstan, they were absolutely against of this. And that was the problem, how you form your message and how you form what you want to tell people. And talking about people, there is another aspect about this. So there's definitely education that is worth thinking about from the very beginning. And education is an integral part of the job that cannot be ignored. So ACBK is a national NGO. It was formed in 2004 and it started as a student club, bird watchers and nature lovers club. And students who came in 2007 in our organization, in this club, they are now not only qualified specialists, but they're only the teachers for younger generations. So they have been working for 20 more years in ACBK, and they now try to raise this new generation of conservationists, what is extremely important for us. And the person from the student club now is a director of ACBK, it's Vera Voronova, and she achieved good results. And this is what is really inspiring us and make us think about investing money, time, and everything that we can in this process, in the young generation. And I think the last lesson that we learned is about you always should have in mind that you should have a plan for success and failures when you work with the species, when you work with the nature. So it's kind of work for restoring species is a never-ending series of successes and failures. And it is important how you approach, how you react to it. So when we started in 2005, 2006, so you see in this graph that the number of Saiga was extremely low. So we started to gather the data, we started to take actions, to build relationships with the communities, with the government, and we achieved some results. However, in the 2015, there was a big mass die-off of Saiga in central Kazakhstan, when almost 70% of Saiga population died. And we started with a new point, kind of with the beginning of something. But of course, we never should give up, and we continue working hard, and there was just recently it was recognized as the world's best example of the recovery of species of ungulates, just to downlisting Saiga from critically endangered to near threatened. And now it's not a failure, but we are facing another round of conflicts. There is a human-wildlife conflict, Saiga and farmers, Saiga and agriculture farmers conflict. And this is what we are learning. We have never had this issue before because the number of saiga was low. But now we are dealing with the new challenges, new issues, and we are ready. And we understand that this is worthwhile to continue working. So as a conclusion, I just want to tell that no matter how well you plan, you always underestimate the amount of work you should do. And no matter how well you plan, you never get the best result. You will always face something else. But of course, the important conclusion is that you definitely should not give up and just continue doing. Keep going, keep learning, and you will achieve some good results. So thank you for your attention. I'm very happy to speak to answer some questions.
Aliona, that's tremendous, and your lesson about that success and failure is so valuable and tremendous. Congratulations, and we're in awe of the work that you've done. I love the ACBK, the education group, and how that's developed over that 20 years. That's just wonderfully tremendous. We do have a few questions, and one of them from Tanya said, can you please suggest some of the methods to approach hunters or fishers, as well as government, to start changing their policies and behaviors? That's an incredibly big question, but can you perhaps give some examples there, or a quick example?
Yeah, definitely. This is the big area to work with. So, so for Saiga, as an example, so there is definitely there was a strategy for sustainable use of the species, and it includes like different aspects. So what steps can be done or should be done before sustainably using the species? And in terms of behavior of local people, so we believe that definitely working with local communities, being and explaining how we work, why it is important is the first thing. The second thing, in Kazakh reality, in Kazakhstan, this is about strengthen the legislation and punishment for illegal hunting or poaching. So this is definitely works. But at the same time, you should probably provide kind of alternatives. So if you are not allowed to hunt or to do the fishery, so there should be kind of alternative sources of income, of life. And this is another part of working with local communities, just to providing them opportunities. So how to live, because there is different groups of people. So one group is local people who hunt, for example, or fish just for food because their families don't have money. Or another group is a kind of, sometimes at a high level, politicians or something else who just hunt for fun. And this is extremely different strategies, how to work with this.
That's fabulous. Thank you. Couple of more questions that are coming in. There's a lot of other antelopes in these high altitude areas across that sort of trans-Himalayan regions, such as markhor, etc. Are you able to monitor or have advocacy for any other species as well, allied to the saiga, or are you focused on saiga?
No, for Altındağ Conservation Initiative, saiga was and still is the flagship species, and our work is driven by the range of saiga, but we also have another work. For example, now we are working for the species reintroduction, and it's about Asiatic wild ass or Kulan and Przewalski horses. So last year we had the first 7 horses in Kazakhstan for the last 200 years. And we try to restore the steppe, restoring its assemblage of species. And we work with bird species, but for antelopes, we work only with saiga. So, and we monitor and do this work.
All right. Super. Now, this is probably almost an impossible question, but we've been asked, just curious, what is the cost of conserving, recovering an individual ungulate? I mean, to take that animal from that to the change in red list status, Have you any idea of the cost? I mean, must be incredible, but any idea?
It is incredible. I can't definitely tell the number because this is kind of so multifactorial process. As I told, there was a huge increase in the number of rangers and their salaries and for patrolling and monitoring. So if we include, it will be definitely billions of probably billion of dollars for this period of 25 years, of course.
Well,
But
again,
yeah, it's definitely very hard to estimate.
well, given the cost and my comment earlier on, let's hope Elon Musk takes an interest. Could you?
We need Elon Musk.
From Tara, a question about the success or not of the CMS MOU on Saiga conservation.
Yes, there is a CMS MOU that was signed by Saiga Range countries and some NGOs. And this MOU has the medium-term international working program for each 5 years. And this is definitely an instrument which is used in Kazakhstan, definitely. And for our partnership, it is guide us how to act, what to do, what are the aims and goals that are written in this document. Yeah, so this is just kind of a guiding document for the range states, and we are working using this.
But it's been a strong tool to have.
It is a good tool to have. It, of course, it depends how country see the value of using this document for Saiga conservation. So now there is kind of, unfortunately, there is only Saiga recovery in Kazakhstan. We still have Saiga in Mongolia, Saiga in Uzbekistan, and there is a lot to work with. But CMS and medium-term work program is a good instrument how to achieve some goals for the 5 years, for the 10 years. So yeah.
Okay, super. Interesting question from Juan. Can captive breeding of the Saiga antelope be an effective solution for its reintroduction into the wild and the reduction of illegal hunting? Is it viable to carry out this process successfully?
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting question. And there are a lot of discussions around this. However, now international experts and international community doesn't consider Saiga captive breeding is the best instrument for Saiga conservation and restoration, because Saiga is because of its biological features. Even not in the zoos around the world, there are many Saigas. It just kind of few zoos have, because it is hard. Saiga very hardly adapt to the artificial, to the fences or to something like that. Of course, captive breeding territory can be large and big, but in Kazakhstan there are just few captive breeding facilities, and they are also facing issues and problems. Yeah, so it's a question, but it's under consideration, and international community and Saiga community is discussing this every time. So how it can can be done.
They've certainly not done well in zoos over the years, and captive breeding is not for all species. And you're making incredible advances with other means. There's a few questions that's coming in. So just to finish off, there's a number of people asking in relation to what was the cause for the big population die-off, or the mass die-off that we saw. Was it a couple of years ago? I can't quite remember now.
Yeah, it was in 2015 for central Kazakhstan population. So in general, Saiga is the species which is characterized by fluctuation because of mass die-offs. So it's okay for Saiga biology. And the reason for 2015 mass die-off, it was revealed that Pasteurellosis, Pasteurella multocida, that started to evolve. So normally this bacteria lives in Saiga and everything is okay with this, but because of some combination of factors, it become it started to kill these animals. So let's say this combination includes climatic conditions like very wet and warm spring, and yeah, some other that is we are still doing the investigation. Yeah, but the reason was that Pastorella started to evolve in the Saiga. And now we are under kind of a big risk because we have 4 million Saigas in Kazakhstan, and if there is a mass die-off, we should deal with this somehow.
Wow. Okay. Goodness. I think I'd like to finish on the real positive note, which is, if I may, to thank you for your presentation. Thank you for answering the questions. There's still a few more on the Q&A, which you might be able to go in and answer for us. But 20 years, that investment, that work to achieve what you've achieved and to inspire us so much. Aliona, thank you so much. Absolutely wonderful. And all credit to you for the awesome work and for what's more to come. We're excited. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And thank you all for your questions. It's great to have that engagement. So, golly, right. It's high upon high upon high. So our next speaker, it's a real pleasure to introduce our next speaker around the Species Pledge, Brian Zimmerman from the Bristol Zoological Society, the Bristol Zoo Project. Brian is the Director of Conservation and Science, a gentleman I know extremely well and a brilliant conservationist. And Brian, you've got to follow Aliona. You realize that, don't you? So please inspire us with the Bristol Zoological Society's Species Pledge.
Thank you very much, David. And thank you to the Reverse the Red team for inviting me to speak today. It's a real pleasure to be here. Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. And I'm really keen to share the Bristol Zoological Society's approach to the Reverse the Red Pledge. As David said, I'm Brian Zimmerman. I'm the Director of Conservation and Society for Bristol Zoological Society for Conservation. So let me try and get my slide. So I'm going to move that there. The pledge for Reverse the Red came at a very appropriate time for us because Bristol Zoological Society was just in the middle of updating its species plan. Over the course of 2024, we were producing volume 2 of our species plan, which includes 97 species. And those are our species that we work with both in our zoo and in the wild in our field sites around the world. And we identified 86 of those species as needing conservation attention, and that we wanted to participate actively to contributing to their success and their survival. Our ultimate goal as a society is by 2030, we will have 90% of the species in our zoo as part of targeted conservation that we're actively involved with or supporting in some way. And we're currently at 78%, so we're well on our way to achieving our target. We're very pleased about that. And we're members of both IUCN and WASA, so it was actually perfectly fitting for us to get involved in the Reverse the Red Pledge. And I realize that for some people, it might seem strange that a relatively small conservation charity would make a pledge to 86 species. It's a big number for us. But also recognizing the scale of biodiversity loss, we recognize that we need to be bold and we need to have strong ambitions in order to dedicate our resources towards species conservation and achieving results. We also know that we've got a fantastic team at the Society, a group of people that are really dedicated to saving species from extinction and achieving results for wildlife. Another key ambition for us as a zoo-based conservation charity was to show the role that a conservation zoo can take in species conservation. This was a really important part of highlighting that for us. So as a kind of starting point, we identified 6 flagship species that we really wanted to showcase to our visitors and to the wider world. These are species from a range of different ecosystems, different geographical locations, and different taxonomic groups that we were already working with in situ, but also in some cases in our zoo. They range from the turquoise blue gecko from the Kimboza forest in Tanzania to the white-clawed crayfish from Europe, including in the UK that we've been working with for many years. The blue-eyed black lemur in Madagascar, Negros bleeding heart dove in the Philippines, the Ankarafa skeleton frog, also from Madagascar and actually scientifically described by one of our team members, Sam Penny, and the Peloponnese valencia, a critically endangered species from a family found only in Europe, found in Greece. And as everybody knows me, I'm going to talk a little bit about fish, and particularly this Peloponnese valencia. I want to spend a little bit of time going into a bit more detail about this, because this is a species that's very dear to me. Together with its sister species, the Corfu valencia, I've been dedicated to working with over the last couple of decades. And 20 years of collaboration with a very, very dedicated team from the Hellenic Center for Marine Research, their Institute of Marine Biological Resources and Inland Waters. Over the last couple of decades, we've been working very, very closely together on these two species and trying to develop conservation management plan for them. And I think 20 years for two small fish species sounds like a long time, but I think it demonstrates two things. One, just how long conservation can take, and we just heard about this from the Saiga example, but also how important it is to have committed and strong partnerships in order to achieve results. It was only after many years of monitoring the species in the wild and also working with it in aquariums and in lab settings and understanding and researching its requirements and what the threats were we able to take that information and, using the IUCN guidelines for translocations, actually develop a plan to try and attempt this as a conservation translocation. This really involved the dedication and hard work of many people, because we needed to not only research the species, but also understand the sites, the locations that they lived in. And over many, many years, we had to determine the suitability. The threats needed to be understood in their entirety, and we had to fully understand the locations where potentially we could transfer the species, and then carefully select the right places. But one thing that I am very pleased to report is that after 20 years, we did have success, particularly for the sister species, the Corfu valencia, where we identified some refugia sites and locations, safe locations for the species to be transferred. And after several years and multiple reintroduction programs, we were able to successfully establish the species in these secure locations, where we continue to monitor them, and we've seen signs of reproduction, so replacement of the fish. It's a very short-lived species, and we've achieved success. We're continuing to monitor these locations, and also in the future going to do more translocation work for the Peloponnese valencia, hopefully to establish very, very strong and secure populations in Greece where needed, because these both are critically endangered species and really in need of good conservation attention. Thank you very much for your attention today.
Thank you so much, Brian. There's a good few questions coming in, but I'm just going to park those for a moment and come back to you in about 10 minutes for some of those questions. So Elijah and Edmund, hang in there. I'll come back to you in a moment. But for now, that really was great, Brian, and just seeing how conservation zoos can really make that difference. I would like now to introduce Mike Clifford, who is Reverse the Red Strategy Director. And Mike's going to talk a little bit more to us about, well, what it's all about, Mike.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, David. So it's so exciting to hear all of these amazing stories. And I know I already feel inspired and energized, and part of what I love about doing all of this work. But for those of you who are maybe not as familiar with Reverse the Red, I want to just kind of paint a picture of what does this strategy look like? How do we all work together to actually reverse the trends of the IUCN Red List? So we are a global coalition that ignites and accelerates strategic recovery-focused action. That's what we're all about, is how do we move to direct actions that can make a real difference for species, and particularly threatened species. So the good news is that we know how to do it. We've just heard multiple stories of the science, the technology, the collaboration, the innovation, the failure and success and endurance that it takes to recover species, but we do know how to do it. So now the invitation for us as this global community is, can we do it at pace and scale that's capable of overtaking biodiversity loss? which is a big task, but I also believe that we're capable, right? Together, we really can reverse the trends of the red list. So as a coalition, we are made up of universities, of zoos, aquariums, botanic gardens, NGOs, CSOs, governments, anyone who has a role and a passion to work towards recovery of threatened species. You're a part of the coalition. We really need each other in order to do this. And I wanted to just say a special thank you to all of these organizations that make up our executive committee. So these are the groups that really drive and steer the strategy that we use, and help keep us kind of on our North Star of what we're trying to achieve and how do we support all of you within this community. So for those of you who may know this or not, I'll give a really quick little bit of context. So 196 countries have agreed to the Global Biodiversity Framework. And this is a set of goals that countries have agreed in order to deliver on and recover biodiversity by 2050. Within those goals, there are 23 targets that are set for the year 2030. So what's important to understand about this is that we have all of these countries who've made this commitment, but governments in and of themselves cannot achieve this on their own. We need the collaboration of whole of government and whole of society. We all have a part to play in this. And one of the things that we've heard is that there's a lot of attention that goes to marine protected areas and climate solutions and land protected areas. And those things are important. They all need to work together. And we also know that species are the foundation of biodiversity, that we see tremendous success when species are actually kind of the lead of so much of this land or marine restoration work. Species are compelling, they're exciting, people can kind of understand what it means when a species is looking to be recovered, whether it's a plant, fungi, or an animal. And so we can use that to really spur and mobilize direct recovery-focused action. The other thing that's good to know about the targets is that these 23 targets are really ambitious. But when it comes to the species elements of these targets, including Target 4, we're not starting from scratch. We have thousands and thousands of organizations, and probably many of you, that are actively doing work. The challenge is that work is not always aligned. And so the Reverse the Red overall strategy is at face value, there are strategies and actions happening internationally, nationally, and locally. The first question is, are we aligned around the same goal? Are we trying to halt extinctions, reverse declines, and recover species? Are we supporting specifically Target 4, which is those urgent management actions for threatened species? So that's the first question. Are we aimed at the right thing? Then second is we have these three levels. And at the international, we have things like the Global Species Action Plan. We have things like the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation. We have the Global Biodiversity Framework itself. At the national level, every country is required to create and submit a national biodiversity strategy and action plan. Every country has these. Many of them are still coming in right now. Some of them highly consider species. Some of them still need work. They need additional support in order to understand how to integrate species into those strategies. And then at the local species level, we have, again, hundreds of thousands of projects going on. The challenge here is, how do we make sure these are aligned? So if you're working at the species level, are you tracking the same metrics? Are you paying attention to the types of things that your national government needs to know so that they can report on and deliver on these big global targets? There's an instance where an incredible group has done amazing work to downlist 2 magnolia tree species. And through conversation, we had asked if they had talked to their national government at all. And in decades, they had never conversed with their government. But they're actively helping the government deliver on these ambitious targets. So we can work together. And then what that looks like within Reverse the Red is what we're doing today. How do we share best practices? How do we share success stories? How do we talk about innovations and failures? How do we inspire one another and provide each other hope, but also recognizing we don't need to recreate the wheel. We don't have to start from scratch. There's so much wisdom and knowledge and tools out there that we can help each other accelerate this work. And I think this quote really summarizes so much of what we're doing in Reverse the Red, is we need to move beyond random acts of conservation kindness. And instead, we need to mobilize strategic coordinated action. Like we said, all of the parts are there. It's a matter of us aligning and making sure that we're working collaboratively. And that really is the impetus behind the Species Pledge. So you've heard multiple examples here of organizations making specific species pledges. What these are is we launched this about a year ago, and we have over 4,000 pledges already. But these are organizations that make specific pledges to specific species with specific actions in certain countries. And what this allows us to do is understand which threatened species have committed actions, which threatened species do not, and it allows us to then collaborate within country and make sure that governments know which organizations and civil society partners are actively supporting, and vice versa. And so we see accelerated work when we can collaborate. And kind of like Alyona was mentioning, knowing who's doing what is so important. And that's what the Species Pledge lets us do. So if you haven't made one yet, please consider making one of the Species Pledges. It's so incredibly important for us to know, and amazing to see the kind of commitment and work that's happening. And where that filters in is that we also have over 30 national recovery networks that have been started. What these are is civil society groups within country that actively support that national government in delivering on these targets. We're going to hear about a little bit more of one of these examples in a bit here, but these exist from the IUCN Species Survival Commission's National Species Specialist Groups. We have over 20 centers for species survival spread around the world right now, which is full-time dedicated staff working towards these efforts. We have Botanic Garden Conservation International tree assessment groups, all sorts of different elements that exist within this. But the point here is that we have the support and we need to align those efforts. What you can see in this, we have a big task in front of us, right? We're still seeing biodiversity loss, but yet we know how to do this. So how do we do it at pace, and how do we do it at scale? And the short answer is together. We have to do it together. Together, we really can achieve this. And it takes every one of you to be involved. And so I can't thank you enough for being a part of this story. We know your dedication. We know that the challenges that you face, and we also know the perseverance that you have. And so we thank you for being a part of it. And we really believe that we can change the course of history where there's benefit to all living things in the future. So together, we do know that we can reverse the red. So let me pause there, David.
Mike, that's fantastic. Thank you. And we've got lots and lots to talk about there. But what I would say, if any of you, your organization, your agency, or your group want to get involved with Reverse the Red, there are many ways. Contact Mike, contact Megan, then they will be delighted to welcome you in. So we're a community and we need that to work. But Mike, I think you've got a bit of good news for us.
I do have a bit of good news. So we are very excited to officially announce the Species Pledge Accelerator Award. So in so many of the stories that we've heard today, sometimes as we have these commitments to these pledges to reverse declines of species, we just need a little bit of support. I mean, there's so many layers from the community side to the publicity side, all of this. So the Accelerator Award, what this will be is for any organizations that have made the Species Pledge for an extinct in the wild, critically endangered or endangered species, you can apply for the award. And what this will do is actually the winners will get an entire suite of support. So you'll get funding, you'll get storytelling and marketing support, you'll get massive global exposure, you'll get strategic support, collaboration support, kind of all of these different pieces and parts that we know go into this work. And the idea is you're already doing amazing work, but we want to accelerate it. So how can we kind of infuse your work with 1 year of just all this different type of support so that we can do this work at a greater pace and a greater scale? So that will be officially announced. All the application and things will open at the end of February. So stay tuned on that. If you haven't made your Species Pledge yet, get it in so that you're eligible for the Accelerator Award come the end of February. So we're super excited about that and can't wait to be able to support some of these projects.
That's fabulous, Mike. There's huge applause coming through in the chat. And there's Tanya asking about how Reverse the Red can help support the marine work they're doing in the Aegean Sea. Tanya, get in touch with Mike and Megan and they can tell you. So it's wonderful.
And one last thing is, so there will be awards for animals, plant, and fungi. So we will distribute it across all kingdoms as well.
Yeah. So watch this space, everybody. So look, I want to just quickly address a couple of the questions on the work or the presentations we've had so far before we launch into the next round of presentations, which are just as exciting. So a couple of quick questions, if I may. And we have one from for Ian from Talia Pellegrin from the WASA office. Hi, Ian. With regards to your species pledge on the Cape and white-backed vultures, is there a part of the work you do focused on communicating and raising awareness to change the negative perception around these species? If so, how?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much for that question. There definitely is a lot of awareness work that we do, and it's largely focused on the fact that vultures are they're cleaning agents for the environment. So rather than seeing them, unfortunately, Disney and the like depicted vultures as these dirty creatures, and that's really tainted them with this bad perception. So we're working very hard to change that perception and really push the narrative that they clean our environment. They take out the harmful pathogens from the environment. So yeah, we do extensive work around awareness linked to that. Thanks for that question.
Thank you, Ian. Actually, Abhishek was asking about are you utilizing the concepts of vulture and raptor restaurants at all?
Yes, absolutely. We are directly involved in vulture restaurants, not so much raptor restaurants, but vulture restaurants. We monitor the vulture restaurants across the region to make sure that they are managed properly, that the food that's put out for the vultures is safe and doesn't have any harmful chemicals associated with it. And we have established a few new vulture restaurants to try and pull vultures away from harmful or dangerous landscapes and into safe landscapes. So yeah, we work with restaurants extensively.
Super, thank you. Brian, there's a few questions coming in for yourself, so I'm going to try and pull those together a little bit. Elijah Ford asks, sort of, what criteria are you using to determine whether an animal you're keeping in your plan needs conservation attention? And then a follow-up to that, Andy Moore asks, how do you communicate that pledge with your zoo visitors, and are they interested?
Okay, great. So we obviously use the red list as a starting point when we're evaluating species, and our species plan very much relied on that. We looked not only just at the threat status of individual species, but also what were the recommended conservation actions, which is a great guide. You know, that those pieces of information that are on that website really help steer our activities, and particularly being a zoo-based conservation charity, if there was a recommended conservation action for ex situ management, that was a big tick in terms of our choice. But we obviously also, as a member of EAZA, the European Association of Zoos and Aquariums, rely on where there's really strong, well-managed programs ex situ for those species. So where there's EEPs that need additional holders of those animals to establish or carry on with insurance populations, we use that heavily as part of our criteria. And in terms of letting people know about our pledges, we did some blogs on those priority species, those particular flagship species that we identified this last year. But also we talk about that on our website and in our interpretation throughout the zoo. We feel it's really important, particularly because we're working with probably a higher proportion of species that a lot of people maybe aren't familiar with. And we really want more people to understand that across the whole spectrum of biodiversity, there are species that need support. And for us, it was a key role for us to play, is getting that message out to our supporters.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brian. And it is incredible when you start to look at that IUCN Red List, just picking out how many species are asking for conservation or that kind of the conservation captive breeding action, and how many opportunities there are to do more.
Yeah, there is. I mean, I think the last time I counted, there was over 3,500 species that need ex situ management. So to me, that's an obvious place where zoos and aquariums can contribute.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brian. Thank you all. We will come back to more questions towards the very end of this session. But now, if you can all cope with this roller coaster of emotions and inspiration, we will start on our next round of presentations. And an area I think where zoos have an amazing role to play, and an area that we can truly focus in is extinct in the wild species. And one of our greatest ambassadors for these extinct in the wild species, and to talk about how we can increase our strategic efforts in line with Target 4, I would like to welcome Fiona Sage, who is the Zoo Conservation Impact Manager from the Zoological Society of London. Fiona, welcome. Hello, Fiona. Hello, Fiona. We can see your screen, but I can't hear you.
Hello, sorry, I couldn't unmute. Hello, everybody. Thank you so very much. So I'm going to be talking today just very briefly, because I appreciate we're very short on time, but talk very quickly about this very exciting initiative that we are working on with our partners at ZSL, and really bringing to life the opportunity that zoos, aquariums and botanical gardens have to contribute towards the Global Biodiversity Framework Target 4. So if we think about within our zoos, aquariums and botanical gardens, we have a group of species which are extinct in the wild. So these species have been lost from nature, and they are often in very small populations. They're often very vulnerable to total extinction, and they are all facing a very perilous future. Even though they are within our zoos, aquariums and botanical gardens, none of them are safe, and they all require our support. And this is an amazing opportunity for zoos, aquariums and botanical gardens to come together, to work together with our partners, and to really drive the recovery of these species. And as we know, there are 81 species that are recognized in this category, but there are many, many more species that are cascading into this same situation. Either it's cascading into total extinction and being lost from nature altogether, or cascading into being extinct in the wild with varying degrees of functionality within their breeding programs. So as I said, this is a real opportunity for us to work together to contribute towards the Global Biodiversity Target 4. Human-induced extinction of known and threatened species being halted by 2050, the extinction rate and risk of all species being reduced. And this just speaks so perfectly to this initiative and the chance for us to come to work together here. And the genetic diversity within our populations of wild and domesticated species being maintained, safeguarding their adaptive potential. So I ask everybody to please take some time to consider how you as your organisations, and whether you are working with any of these species at the moment or considering it within your species planning, and to think about how you may consider joining the Extinct in the Wild Action Partnership. I think on the chat there'll be a video shared, so please do also take a chance to have a look at that.
Super. Thank you, Fiona. It is a very, very exciting initiative, and I really would urge people to take a look at that work. But you touched on it. But that coordination and alignment, why is it so important? And what do you see as the challenges and perhaps the opportunities to align our efforts more strategically?
So I think we all understand and we all recognise that we can achieve more when we work together. And I think we all recognise all, if not almost all, of our species recovery is done in partnership. And therefore, we need to make sure this partnership is organised and strategic so that we are able to achieve best outcomes. And within the framework of species recovery, we are often faced with multiple funding challenges. And these funding challenges can sometimes inhibit our ability to deliver on species recovery and our ability to reform, as we're potentially stuck within some restrictive grant situations. So again, this presents a challenge, but again, an opportunity. We have a real chance to come together with our donors and to come together with our partners to produce more impactful funding applications, which really maybe speak a bit more strongly towards funding priorities and also our overall goals. So I think we see it as a challenge, but we also see that as an opportunity. And I think we also require, to achieve species recovery, we all know we require a huge diverse range of skills, and we require those skills to be often in different geographies, different continents, different cultures. And so there's a real opportunity again, and a real need for coordinated and strategic alignment in how we deliver upon this.
Super, thank you. I mean, I think it's very interesting when you mention funding at the moment, and I'm sure many of us on this call are experiencing a sudden loss of funding due to a certain removal of US aid. funding. No need to comment, just me making my political little statement. More positively, there's loads of global frameworks out there. What do you think are the most important ones for our efforts to be aligned with?
So I think it's really important for us to join together and use our regional and national associations and think about how we track impact and use consistent impact measures to speak directly to these global biodiversity frameworks. We obviously have GBF Target 4, which is the one that I'm speaking very closely to today, and is a real key opportunity for zoos, aquariums, and botanical gardens to be really recognised by governments and societies as forces for good, and to really be recognised in our work at contributing towards species recovery. And so this speaks so closely towards GBF Target 4. But we also need to consider the Red List and the opportunity that we have there, and how that's really fantastic for identifying needs and priorities and highlighting those species which are in desperate need of urgent action, and obviously, of course, the Green List.
Super, thank you. You touched on the metrics that's there and things such as the Target 4, etc. But in the work that you're doing, particularly sort of extinct in the wild, do you have metrics and measures associated with your efforts that you could tell us more about?
Yes, so within Extinct in the Wild, we have split our work into what we call the 4 Rs. So rescuing those species which are cascading rapidly into extinction, revitalizing those species under human care. So the work that mostly our zoos, aquariums, and botanical gardens are doing an amazing job delivering on. Releasing these species back into safe wild habitat where appropriate and in line with IUCN best practice. And then most importantly, reinforcing these populations. So staying in touch, monitoring these species, post-release monitoring, and leading to their ultimate downlisting on the IUCN Red List. And so for each of these 4 Rs, we do have quite clear, tangible targets. We recognise that red listing, whilst it's obviously extremely beneficial and important, the time delay can be sometimes a little bit too long to track all of these individual steps. And so we do have targets for each of these 4 Rs. And I think it's also important to think a bit more broadly what our generalized metrics are across our different institutions, and how we have these networks in place through WASA, through EASA, and how we can make sure we are tracking impact in a consistent way, in a way that works for our organizations, but then also can be scaled up so that our impact can be measured and seen and appreciated on a much more global scale. Often we are all doing the same things and moving in a similar direction, but we may be tracking things very differently. And that can either just create huge administrative headaches to try and align your tracking with, that of your regional association, and you're trying to, make a square peg fit into a round hole. And it can waste a lot of time, resource, and be quite demotivating. But also just to sort of really be able to magnify that impact on a much more beneficial scale, and enable us to be able to talk more powerfully about the global work of zoos, aquariums, and botanical gardens.
Fiona, that's fabulous. It's incredibly exciting work. You touched on a number of things there, which people are already coming through some questions we'll touch on later. But that kind of global metrics and how we report on those things are so important. I would draw attention perhaps to some comments in the chat that WASA are working around a 2030 conservation goal, so that we can all be kind of moving towards similar reporting. On the Reverse the Red Species pledge, we ask people to come through to metrics so that we can actually show and prove and evidence the work that we're doing. So it's all very exciting, and still lots of work to do. But thank you very much, Fiona. Stick around for some questions later, please. But Reverse the Red is not just about animals. It's not just about, it's about far more than that. It is about reversing the red of all species. So I'm now delighted to welcome Megan Barstow from Botanic Gardens Conservation International to show the work that they are doing and how far advanced they are around their global strategy for plant conservation and all those metrics. Megan, welcome.
Hi, thank you, and thanks to Reverse the Red for asking me to represent plants on this very important webinar. So most people don't know what Botanic Gardens Conservation International is, so I'm just going to briefly describe what we do. So we are a membership organization and we manage a network of botanic gardens, and there are about 3,500 botanic gardens around the world, and about 900 of those are members. So we're representing like a huge chunk of expertise in botany, plants, and all those other important aspects that botanic gardens do to a wider audience and community, as well as enhancing the skills within that community. And part of our role as the botanic at BGCI is to host the Secretariat for the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation. And this is what I'm mostly going to be talking about today. And it's actually great to follow what Fiona was talking about having unified metrics and things like that, because that's something that the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation is really trying to achieve. So in 2002, the GSPC was established and it's embedded in what is now the Global Biodiversity Framework. And it was set up to kind of recognize that plants weren't really being included in these global discussions. So to really give a voice for plants and to have their importance echoed throughout this international policy space. And that to achieve these global actions and these global targets, we really need to be including plants within them and have recognition of the actions that botanic gardens and other organizations are taking for plants. So the GSPC has been operating for over 20 years now, and we've had some huge successes. This includes putting a wild flora online, which includes over 400,000 named plant species that we're trying to do conservation work for, and then also influencing national plant conservation strategies. So many biodiverse countries such as South Africa, China, North America, and then also Europe as a region have taken the global strategy for plant conservation and used it to produce kind of national and regional targets for their own plant conservation, which is that adaptive management that Mike was also speaking about. And I think that's a really important mechanism of the GSPC, is that it can work at all levels and be adapted at all levels to have this throughflow of work all going in the same direction to save plant species. And this has become even more aligned with the new phase of the CBD in the KMGBF, where each KMGBF target now has a set of specific plant actions embedded underneath it. So that when we are coming to doing reporting on what plant action has been occurring as non-state and state actors, they're all aligned, and this can all be contributed to this global framework and this global monitoring and tracking. So it's become a much more versatile tool since its adoption 20 years ago to where we are in the present day. And it was also really important to have this representation because there's so much plant conservation action occurring across the world. On Action 4, just within BGCI, we have half a dozen programs that are taking action at this species level to reduce the decline in plant species, to conserve them in situ and ex situ, to understand what recovery actions are needed, and all those things that we're really familiar with on this call in terms of taking action for a species, but making sure this is done in a really holistic way for plants and through one kind of central mechanism for this as well. And the end of my presentation is going to be looking at how we're measuring progress and metrics. And this is where we're really aligned with Reverse the Red. And we're hoping to put more of our actions that gardens are undertaking as Reverse the Red pledges over the coming months. But we do want to be monitoring what plant conservation action is happening. So as in alignment with what Fiona was saying about extinct in the wild species, we have a database hosted at BGCI called BGCI's Plant Search. And this is where we have a list of which plants are held in botanic garden collections, so we can identify where those extinct in the wild species are being propagated. And then again, where sharing can occur to really boost these populations in ex situ collection, and then where we might be willing to wanting to take in situ action as well. Similarly, we've been speaking about how the IUCN Red List is a really important tool, but sometimes they don't host national assessments, and sometimes those are better for prioritizing plant conservation action, considering how widespread plant species can be. So we also host a database called Threat Search, which looks at recording any conservation assessment for a plant species to help prioritize conservation action for plants at that global, national, and even state level, if that's what is available. One tool I wanted to talk about in particular is our global tree portal. So this came about through a project we have at BGCI called the Global Tree Assessment, which involves over 1,000 individuals who have been assessing the world's the extinction risk to the world's tree species. You might have seen in October that we've now published IUCN Red List assessments for 80% of the world's trees, and that's all that data has been gathered on the IUCN Red List, but we're also gathering it on this global tree portal, and it provides a visualization of tree species data at the species, country, and global level. And we're really hoping this can be used as a prioritization tool for policymakers and practitioners to identify how many threatened species they have, where these are already in ex situ and in situ collections. So we've done some mapping using Protected Planet and things like that to find out where these species are already conserved, to really prioritize action here. And something else that we're doing is implementing a conservation action tracker. So this is having this alignment of what people are already doing in the field and how that can be used, and how we can see that presented online so people already know where action is happening and really share that information. So currently our action tracker holds information on 4,780 tree species and 1,122 critically endangered species. And we're working on turning this information into pledges as well. As you can see, the example on the screen over here is the action tracker. And for this species, which is a Dipterocarp species from Southeast Asia, which is a big timber tree, we don't really understand what's happening for this species in terms of conservation action. But the action tracker allows us to record this information for where we do know this is happening. So we have a flagship species at BGCI, which is the Mulanje cedar, native to Malawi. Its Latin name is Rhydfruntonia whitei. And we've been able to enhance living collections of these species from wild origin, put in place a species recovery plan and a propagation protocol. And then we've been able to record and say, we have information on all of this if you're interested in our conservation action tracker. So it's really about getting this very discrete technical information available to a wider audience, similarly to what the Reverse the Red Pledge is trying to do. So that was a bit of a speedy walk through what we're doing at BGCI and the global strategy for plant conservation. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us at policy@bgci.org. And I'll stop sharing my screen. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you so much, Megan. I genuinely had the pleasure of going through that action tracker a few months ago. I never thought I'd be quite so excited about following an action tracker. It's tremendous, and this just is so much. We can often live in our own little worlds of partula snails or certain trees or the fish that Brian was talking about. I've already forgotten the name, but we've got so much to learn by sharing the information and sharing the tools. We don't need to reinvent wheels. We just need to perhaps slightly tweak them to get amazing tracker results about those that you've done at BGCI. So quickly though, but you talked about getting it out to a wider audience.
Yeah.
How do people see that tracker? What is publicly available for us to see?
So all those screenshots I took that are in that presentation, all that information is available like freely to the public. We do have a data request form if people want some really specific analysis, but that's often free of charge if you're an NGO. And all that information is available on the BGCI website. If you go to our resources tab, you'll see that the Global Action Tracker is on there as a database. The Global Tree Portal is on there as a database, so you can click through and search for it there, and I will pop the link in the chat.
Amazing.
People can see it.
To all of you out there, honestly, go on and look at this, explore it. It's wonderful. I was going to say we'll crash the BGCI website, but we won't. With so many inquiries, it's wonderful. There's so much information that's there, and it's a real learning for SOAR, how Reverse the Red can continue to do some tracking, how WASA can develop its tracking. So it's a really, really great resource.
Yeah,
so,
and we'd love to work with you all about that as well.
This is part of this coalition, and that's what
Yeah.
Reverse the Bread brings us all together. So I'm noticing there's not an awful lot of questions going into the question and answer session. Please, we've got lots of time towards the end to ask your questions. Please put your questions in the Q&A function. Otherwise, you're just going to get me asking very, very naive questions. I'd much rather ask your questions and make sure that we get this good dialogue going. This Reverse the Red forum is there for you and your chance to learn from these incredible people. So, to our next incredible person, Mirza Kuzurini, a very welcome to you from the Indonesia National Species Specialist Group. You've already been doing one forum and webinar today, so thank you for joining us. And a big part of why Reverse the Red exists is to help bridge the gap between actions and national level strategies. So perhaps we could start our conversation by telling me more about the National Species Specialist Group, how it works, and what are you trying to achieve?
Well, thank you, David. So thank you very much for Reverse the Red for inviting me, and also for putting me on the 7 p.m. times, not 3 a.m. So it worked really well. So good evening from Indonesia. This is a rainy season, so it's not really sunny here, but it's really wonderful to hear all the talks and also giving and trying to talk about more about the Indonesia Species Specialist Group. So the Indonesia Species Specialist Group is part of the Species Survival Commission. So we are a new type of specialist people that working on species in the one national. So in this case, for Indonesia Species Specialist Group, it is working with Indonesia, working in Indonesia species. And we are quite new. So Indonesia Species Specialist Group established 2 years ago. And we have around 140 members, half of them already members from other taxon-based specialist group. But what really good with this kind of national specialist group is we can work together because before that, kind of like we only work or networking between some of our people. The marine species people doesn't really talk with the people working in the forest. The people that working with the big species, charismatic species, doesn't really talk with the the people that work on the small species. And also, this is a very good things to catalyze, the national effort. For instance, now Indonesia is planning to have the Indonesia's red list assessment, which will be the first one because we've never done a national red list assessment before. And it's good to work together to look at what species that really need to increase the conservation action, and also work together with the government how to improve the conservation action for all these species. I think that's briefly what we are planning to do, David.
Well, only 2 years, but there's a lot of plans that are there. That you mentioned about governments, and this is an important part of species recovery. Do you feel that just within that 2 years, you've been able to form a strong working relationship with the government in that time?
Well, we are really lucky, actually, David, because before we formed the Indonesia Species Specialists individually, some of us already working with the government. For instance, I'm already working with the Ministry of Forestry and several of my colleagues also. So when we plan to do to develop this specialist groups, actually we involve the government, so they also endorse the specialist group. And also we also talk about the possibility of working together between the specialist group and the ministry. And in this case, it's not only one ministry. For most people that know Indonesia probably will know that when you're working with species in the forest, especially protected species, you're working with the Ministry of Forestry. But when you're working with marine species, you're working with the Ministry of the fisheries and marine affair. And I don't have many experience with this ministry, but our members from the marine have a lot. So we managed also to come to the
Oh, I think we just lost you.
to them and then talk about what kind of target for. Oops. Can you hear me now? My internet connection is
good.
unstable. Hello, David.
We're
Okay.
good.
Thank you. So, yeah, good. So we are not working only with Ministry of Forestry, but also the Ministry of Fisheries and Marine Affairs. And also because of the target 4 is now needed to be like a target for national, we also work with the Ministry of Planning that set aside funding for its ministry and to do, to achieve the target 4. So yeah, we have a strong connection. I'm happy to say that, but it is because also previously we have individuals, that's our members that are already working, and we try to establish connection.
So the power of the individual relationships is really important.
You're right.
With the government.
Yeah,
for sure. I'm sure
you are right.
Many of us experience that. And possibly also understanding the challenges that the government departments have in terms of delivering on species efforts. What would you say was their biggest challenge?
I think one of the biggest challenges was
Oh, we've got an unstable connection again.
I have talked with them is actually that year the coming Montreal. Oops, sorry. David, can you hear me?
We missed a little
now?
bit, and you're back.
Hello.
You're back now.
Okay, I'll start again. Okay,
Start
so
again,
when sorry, the connection here is not really good. Yeah, so when we have a discussion with the government, especially when they need to achieve this target 4, we just realized that they have a limited understanding of the critical tools like the red list index, which is the headlights indicator, of course. So to address it, of course, the government need to invest time and capacity building. And we actually, IDSSG, have the human resource that already have understanding. So we just need to connect with them and helping them in workshop and also engaging with the key stakeholders. And also, I think the sheer volume of programs and targets the government have already had, especially now we have changed the presidents, and also all the change in the policy. So it's kind of like difficult to them because they have limited human resource, and it's make create time constraints and competing priorities. Of course, it make them difficult to focus on species specific conservation effort. So yeah, there's challenge. There's a huge challenge for the government, but yeah, we'll try to help them. Hopefully we can also help them, and work together.
And again, with those relationships, with the contacts that you're building up there, hopefully governments are now turning to you for more support and more help and more advice. So that's a real positive relationship.
You're right.
Let's finish this little section again in terms of some inspirational story. What's your great example of conservation win or success story of conservation in Indonesia?
This is a bit difficult because there's so many, species. And I couldn't really pinpoint that we have managed to, reverse the red in terms of we managed to put the species on critical endangered into lower level, But we have several species that are noteworthy that we are doing great work with. And I always love stories about, species lesser known, not really talking about, the tigers or the rhinos or the orangutans. Species like the turtles, the Roti Island turtles. It's kind of like extinct in the wild in Indonesia, but there's a lot in the zoo. And there's the
Mirza, I
government
think
now with the help of the quite well now in oops, sorry. Can you hear me now?
we lost you on Roti Island.
Okay, yeah, Roti Island, yeah. Sorry about this, but Roti Island is nearly extinct in the wild. So the government now is really want to bring them back. So they work together with the NGO, with the academia, and also with the zoo around the world. And they're bringing back it, and they're doing a good program because I've been to go there, look at the, the temporary enclosure, look at the program, they're doing well. So I'm really positive that there will be good news in the future.
Fabulous. Well, Fiona, I hope you were listening to that because Roti Island needs to get into the Extinct in the Wild Alliance.
Yes, absolutely. It's very much on that list of cascading species.
See, we're already getting collaboration.
Yeah, good.
Mirza, thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.
We're now coming to a session where we've got the speakers, and I think all our speakers have stayed with us, which is fabulous. A chance for more questions to come through. We don't have many in the Q&A, so you're going to end up suffering questions from me. But Lucy has been asking a number of questions around biobanks. So if I could invite all the speakers back onto screen, please. And really, it was a question from Lucy about the role of biobanks, funding of biobanks, the potential of using biobanks for critically endangered species. Certainly referred to those in terms of the botanics. So perhaps Megan, I could start with you.
Yes, hi. I haven't read the question specifically. Sorry.
It's really the role of biobanks that's being used for plant conservation. Where can we get more funding from them, and their future role within your planning?
Yeah, so I guess we have botanic gardens which are hosting living collections of plants, but then we also have seed banks which are obviously hosting the germplasm of plants, and they've seen like a huge expansion in the last few decades, and I think that's incredibly important. And a seed is and a plant to some extent is much easier to conserve in a very confined space compared to what you're trying to achieve in zoos. So they're easier to fund, they can be a bit more mobile. We have a lot of low cost methods that can be used in the field and in countries and organizations that don't have huge budgets. So the Millennium Seed Bank Partnership does a lot of work on that, and they have huge global reach as well. So I think it's kind of that adapting to what resources you do have is also an important thing to consider, as well as having more funding and more resources, because we can always have more, but I think also showing what you can do with the resources you have is also really important as well. And sometimes people see seed banking as a last resort in terms of plant conservation, because we really want to see people growing these plants. And if we have them in seed and we don't know how to propagate them, to what extent is that an important conservation action is a bit of a debate that happens in the scene. So we need to make sure there's funding for these facilities, but also that there's funding also for the research to then repropagate the plants as well. And I think that's probably a bigger issue, which we don't have a solution for at the moment. But yeah, there's lots of guidance on resourcing on the Millennium Seed Bank website, I think.
Thank you, Megan. Would anybody else like to jump in? Fiona, is biobanking a big part of the Extinct in the Wild Alliance?
I think biobanking is an extremely important tool that we need to take advantage of the opportunity of. Our core mission is to be putting species back into safe wild habitats, and for no extinct in the wild species to slip into extinction under our watch. Putting a species into a biobank and then it slipping into extinction is obviously better than just letting it slip into extinction. But our core mission is to be putting these species back into safe wild habitat. Nevertheless, I think we need to recognize, and again, that role of collaboration and working as a community and really remembering our end goals when we're biobanking and not getting entirely hung up on minutiae of detail that in perhaps 10, 20 or 50 years won't matter, and just being really thinking of how we can be preserving these species in a way where we do not have the technologies yet to potentially be using them. So being suitably cautious and mindful of how we're preserving these species, but at the same time really focusing on our end goals.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess one of the biggest elements around biobanking is the need to ensure that we are getting samples into our biobanks. I don't know if anybody's got any comments on that. Brian, do you have any insight into that?
Certainly as a zoo, we contribute to biobanks. Our vets are very much dedicated to collecting specimens for biobanks whenever there's an opportunity for us. I think I completely agree with what Fiona said, that, our priority is certainly about trying to focus on the species while it's still alive, but it would be a missed opportunity if we didn't take samples when we've got that just in case as a backup.
Thank you. Fiona, you wanted to add something?
Sorry, I was just going to add one further comment to biobanking. I think particularly with our extinct in the wild species, we do have to be mindful. We have this amazing opportunity to be reasonably hands-on and able to achieve these samples. I think we do need to be very mindful in where these species are coming from. Many of these species are coming from the global south, and being really mindful that our biobanks are not only located within the global north.
Thank you. Megan?
I just wanted to say something briefly about meta collections, which is now which is making sure we're retaining the diversity of sufficient organisms that when we then put them back out into the field, that there's no genetic repercussions of that. So that's also a really important part of the global biodiversity framework, and also something we're setting methodologies up for in the Botanic Garden community as well.
Super. Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, I was going to actually add to what Megan just said, is thinking about meta populations. I've heard this conversation more and more recently of we still tend to segment the way we think about our conservation work as here's ex situ and here's in situ, and here's a biobank for emergency versions. Particularly, as we get to species like extinct in the wild or critically endangered, as those populations reduce, I think it's one of the areas we need to start thinking a little differently as a community, to recognize that it's more of a spectrum rather than these isolated aspects. And so I've continued to hear that more when you've got wild populations that are really reduced, is that thinking through even the living collections out of botanic gardens, aquariums, and zoos as a part of an entire population, and treating it that way, because that really changes the planning and the potential of what we can do to recover a species. if the planning, recovery planning only happens for in situ folks and the ex situ realities aren't a part of that discussion, we're missing an entire, not only the genetic realities of that, but an entire kind of set of expertise and knowledge and wisdom. And so thinking of ourselves as more of an interconnected ecosystem, which is probably what most of our science and knowledge is in anyways, but thinking of ourselves as kind of a conservation ecosystem with all these different tools rather than the segmented out parts, I think is something we need to really consider deeply in the future.
Thank you, Mike. I'm going to declare an interested party because at the Royal Zoological Society, Scotland, where I'm based, we do have a biobank, and it is a real struggle in terms of financing because there is not huge amounts of funding around for biobanks, but the value that we've had in terms of using it as a research potential to provide that evidence that we need, that Aliona, you talked about, of how populations have changed, has been incredible for us during the restoration of Scottish wildcats back to Scotland. Really understanding the population, the historical population, to actually inform good conservation, translocation, or rewilding progress. So the value of biobanks, not just in preserving our species, but as research base for our conservation work, is essential. And funding, there's questions about funding in the questions. Good luck. It's hard. It's really hard to get that funding. Okay, moving on a little. Lucy, I hope that answered your questions. We're getting some good, interesting questions coming through, and I'd like to touch on one which I think is fantastic. A general question to all speakers: would you consider conserving a non-lethal parasite species living on a host species that is a target of the conservation plan? Conserving parasites. Was that part of your evidence, Aliona, when you were looking at the Saiga?
Yeah, I think this is where the multifactorial approach should work. So we need to gather more evidence and more information how it will influence the other species or something like that. So just to gather more data and more information and then try to decide.
Thank you. Brian, I really hope you're going to talk about mountain chickens.
I'm not going to talk about mountain chickens. I'm going to talk about fish, of course, David. It's an interesting question because when we were in the early stages of looking at our translocation project in Greece, we discovered that one of the populations that we were considering as a source for moving them, the fish in it had an intestinal parasite. I can't remember the name of it, but it really stalled things for about a year where we were deciding whether or not it would be appropriate for us to move these fish when they have this parasite living on them, non-lethal. And so we did a lot of work across different locations to find out how ubiquitous the parasite was in fish populations. And it really slowed things down quite a bit because we didn't want to be moving some parasite to another water source, whatever, where it didn't exist. And we did consult quite a bit of the guidelines in terms of would this be appropriate or not. And in the end, we were lucky, I guess, in the sense that we did find that the parasite was found in some of the recipient sites as well. So our job was a little bit easier, but it did create quite a bit of discussion of what is appropriate. And I think if a parasite has evolved alongside a particular species, it's clearly part of the life history of that animal. And provided the risk it's not there of introducing a novel parasite to other species or to other populations where it didn't exist, then yes, I think absolutely you should.
Thank you. The mountain chicken comment, it was when Brian and I were working at Zoological Society of London, and some mountain chickens were brought in from the wild as part of the programme. There was huge debate about whether we should treat them for parasites or not. Vets versus conservationists. I think we've moved on from then, but it was good fun. Anybody else, any other thoughts on parasites? Okay, wonderful. Misha, I'm going to just come to you with a particular question, but I would like others to think around this. the question specifically for you was about with your national species specialist group working with the government around the red list assessment. How can you ensure it stays on track, given that government priorities can actually shift? So we'll start with you, but that is exactly the same for so many other of us trying to work with governments. So, but particularly in relation to the work that you've done.
Okay, yes. So thank you. This is a really hard question because actually the IDSSG has a very huge task. First, we managed to get attention from the government and also commitment from the government. But we also know that the government doesn't really have lots of money at the moment to do this very huge number of red list assessment. We have, for the Indonesian global assessment, we have around 17,000 species, and we have a really thinking of having hopefully 20,000 assessment for species in Indonesia by 2030. So this is a huge task, and we know that the government probably couldn't really help us. So it's at least they can help us in leveraging, funding, not only from the government, but also from other institutions as well. And we kind of like help them to achieve them. So we have kind of like task force dealing with for instance, primate. We have task force working with birds and everything. And we hope by 2030, with this like 5 years or 4 years, we can manage it. But let's see. But we try to work together. But we also already have a conversation with the government that the result will be objective. It won't be under the government in terms that they will. Sometimes maybe the government will not be happy if one species considered as critical endangered or anything, but we already have a discussion that this is really things that we are doing, objectively. We have, the tools, and we are working on it, and the result, even though that is not really a good result, but it can help, for the conservation of the species in the future.
Super, thank you. Mike, I think, a role with Reverse the Red in terms of, let's put it in a positive way, working in collaboration with government rather than trying to keep them on track is a real potential role that Reverse the Red has. Could you give us a comment on that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned earlier, we have over 30 countries where we have a kind of in-country civil society network. MIRSA and the National Species Specialist Group is one of those. The reality is every country is different. So there's no kind of one-size-fits-all solution, but we can learn from one another. There's a lot of things that we can replicate. And actually in about an hour, if you're available, you can join us for the national version of this conversation that'll be taking place as well. But one of the things I think to keep in mind is we know that we need whole of government and whole of society in order to deliver on biodiversity recovery. But what that means is we have to recognize the roles of what government can do and what civil society can do. And so the nature of government is that there is change on some sort of a regular repetition. Again, it's different depending on every country, so I'm being very general here. But when we hear stories all the time of, priorities change when there's an election and a new government rolls in, or staff change out, or, oftentimes within species, the agents who are working on species might get promoted to a different department, and then you don't know what's going to happen and all this. This is actually, to me, the beauty of the civil society partnerships, because we can come in and we can work collaboratively and make sure that we understand priorities and understand what governments care about. But the NGOs, the CSOs, the species specialist groups, we can provide a sense of endurance and consistency across time, because species recovery is not generally fast work, but governments aren't always equipped to handle 20-year projects or 30-year projects. And so we are able to provide that sustained effort and sustained direction. And in a number of instances, what Reverse the Red is doing is we're working to connect these groups and these kind of long-term commitments and align it with the priorities of governments. Oftentimes, I think governments are willing to support and even fund in instances if we can show that there's alignment and mutual kind of goal orientation between the work of the civil society partners. And actually, Ian, if I can kind of, I might throw it to you, because I think this is a lot of what you do, is you work really closely with, aligned with SANBI and some of the different the government teams, but you're still deploying action as a non-governmental agency. So I don't know, Ian, if you would have anything to weigh in on that.
Yeah, absolutely. We work very closely with SANBI. SANBI's primarily a research institution and a parastatal. So they're a key partner of ours in terms of the assess and plan part of the process. And then we usually take over in the act part. But yeah, we work very closely with them in terms of the assess and plan parts of the process towards conserving species.
Super. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Ian. Megan.
I just wanted to talk briefly about the conservation planning specialist group. So I don't know if any of you work with them, but they also similarly are integrating, making sure that when they're hosting these planning sessions for species level or multi-species planning, that the government officials are in the room helping make those decisions so they can say which bits of those plans that the government can take on and can fund and like pay attention to, and then the NGOs are kind of left with the other stuff as well. So it's something we're exploring in plants and multi-species conservation planning in plants. So that's also a good way to kind of integrate that multi-tier integration into conservation as well, between national, regional, and on the ground.
Super. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to just quickly try and combine a couple of questions into one, because the question that's come in is around the role of the private sector in terms of conservation efforts. Now, whether that's the private sector and relates to all those people that keep all those amazing orchids in their private collections, or many we've known, Brian, that many fish are kept in these private collections. How do we harness, or do we harness, the private sector in conservation efforts? And also that probably comes to finance as well. And does the private sector or the commercial sector or the finance industry have how do we harness the role of green finance? That's quite a complex question for people as we come towards the end. Anybody would like to jump in? Ian, wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I think there are different ways that you can interpret what the private sector is and their involvement. We've got a branch that is called the Biodiversity and Business Unit that really focuses on working with big corporates to identify what their biodiversity footprints are across their various land holdings and their partners, and then work with them to reduce the impact of those biodiversity footprints. So in that way, we're trying to have corporates take responsibility for their direct footprints and their direct impacts on biodiversity. But in a similar way, we work with those same corporates to build an appreciation for the broader impacts that society has on biodiversity, and to try and enhance a more philanthropic type of approach to impact beyond their own land holdings.
Fabulous. Thank you, Ian. Anybody else? Anything to offer? I think the green finance opportunities are amazing, but biodiversity credits, all of that side of it, it's so new, and trying to get that into there. And Reverse the Red is trying to speak with many large funds and trying to get people interested. The money's out there. How we get it is a tough one. Fiona, then Ian.
I would take a similar answer to that of biobanking, and if we look at the rate of species preservation, if you like, and the rate of, particularly through an extinct in the wild lens, returning species to safe wild habitat, we do need new and innovative approaches. And whilst we always must remain cautious and we always must remain appropriate in our risk management, we cannot afford, I don't think, to continue with the same approach to funding this as we have done since the 1970s. If we look at species that have been lost from human care, we are looking at an almost equal number versus species that have been released into safe wild habitat. And, you know, novel and innovative approaches, particularly within the funding scape, are going to be needed to resource this work. So again, I would take a similar approach to biobanking in terms of balance and risk management, but acknowledging that we cannot continue along the rate of change that we have had for the last 50 years.
Super. Ian.
Yes, thanks. Fiona, I 100% agree with you. And I think I want to really pick on you highlighting the proceed with caution approach. At the biodiversity COP in Cali, there were a number of very contentious approaches and discussions around biodiversity credits, and it's a dangerous space. So it's certainly an opportunity and something that we should look to for sustainable finance for conservation, but we need to be very, very careful about how we do it. And I think the world needs to take that to heart in terms of the cautions and the pitfalls. Sustainable finance in general offers many opportunities for the kind of finance that provides income towards long-term conservation that the normal types of grants and foundations don't offer. They normally offer short-term grants. So it's that long-term funding that is critical for many of the landscape type and bigger impact at scale type conservation initiatives that are required for extensive conservation. So absolutely, we need to look at these opportunities and jump on them, but proceed with caution.
Thank you, Ian. Wonderful answers. There's, I think we could go on all day, but as I kind of draw this session to an end, Mike, I'd like to just come to you if you've got any particular closing comments.
Yeah, thanks, David. I mean, this is also fantastic, and we could talk for hours on all these different topics and biodiversity credits and planning strategies and all these things. And I think what it shows to me is that we need all these parts. What we're dealing with is complex. You know, we're all of us and all of you that are watching and listening, you know, we each have a critical role in this big ecosystem of what it's going to take to recover biodiversity. And we're in this work because left to its own, we're losing biodiversity. And so the real challenge for us is how do we learn to listen, and how do we take those moments to pause and hear what others are doing, to learn about what tools and frameworks are there. Again, we've heard it a number of times. How do we not recreate the wheel? Because we do need to accelerate this pace and the scale of this work. We know how to recover species. We have the tools, science, technologies, connections. We have all that. And we need to do it at a pace that we haven't seen done before. So we have a big task ahead of us, but really it's going to rely on all of us working together and finding ways to align and share and connect and collaborate. So moments like this, I think that's why this is so important, and why it's so hopeful and inspiring, is to see that we can do it together. So that's kind of my big takeaway is this is just the start of the discussion. I hope that this has spurred a lot more conversation for everyone who's watching, and your teams and organizations and all the satellite events out there. But together we can do this. I really deeply believe that. And so we're thankful for each of you in all of your roles in participating in it. Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. It's just beholden to me now to thank all of the presenters and speakers here. Thank you for some incredible work, the incredible work you do. We will thank some of those incredible species: golden mole, roti island, turtle, and saiga. Oh, saiga. It is tremendous. Thank you all. I'm also going to say a wonderful thank you to Megan Joyce, who puts all this together for us and does so much work and hides behind the Reverse the Red logo. Megan, you're wonderful. Thank you. If you have not all been inspired enough over the past couple of hours, then we're going to finish off on this forum with the most incredible video from one of the partners of Reverse the Red, Tanglebank Studios, who we could not simply have done this without. So thank you all. Let's reverse the red. Enjoy your work, and thank you. Goodbye.
Oh, look, a live hatchling.
Oh.
All right. Hey, little guy.
Here in Boca Raton, we have 5 miles of sandy beach, and we get 3 species: the sea turtle, leatherback, loggerhead, and green nesting on our beaches. How we're going to help the species recover is by protecting nests and protecting hatchlings so they can one day grow up and be adult turtles and come back to these nesting grounds.